Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Vision of Escaflowne Retrospective. Having just taken a look at the big bad of the series, that of Emperor Dornkirk, I think it's time that we look at his two right-hand lords, that of Dillandau and Folken. We will start this off by dedicating this video to the examination of the character of Lord Dillandau, later revealed to be Selena Shazar, sister of Alan Shazar. Now, Dillandau's character and writing is fascinating to me, as it combines the trope of a brutal enforcer with a few very unconventional elements to create a very unique and memorable persona. When I first met Dillandau, I simply took Dillandau to be the token, bloodthirsty warlord, the person that enjoys combat way too much for their position, and seems to revel in destruction simply for the sake of it. I assumed that Dillandau would solely be a two-dimensional and functional character, one that, while getting the job done, isn't necessarily too deep or complex. And while that is perhaps true to an extent, as Dillandau is not the deepest character in some regards, Dillandau's writing does do a lot with what in most series usually isn't that much of a character. Again, while Dillandau isn't the deepest character, the amount of characterization that is present and the amount of twists and turns that take place during the characterization process make Dillandau a very unique and memorable character, and in fact it's kind of a triumph of the series, as what in most series would be a token, despicable warlord is transformed into a fascinating and perhaps even sympathetic person. I don't know if I would go that far, but it is a very tragic story, and one that even serves as a sort of commentary on the idea of destiny. One that, while following someone who isn't completely fleshed out, obviously has some depth, and obviously has a story to tell. So let's start by looking at that story real quick before going more into the character exploration. Now, Dillandau is introduced in episode 2 as the leader of the Dragon Slayers, an elite team of knights bent on enforcing the will of the Emperor as they see fit. In this role, Dillandau loosely acts as a subordinate of sorts to Folken, carrying out his orders and brutally attacking both target and civilian alike. In fact, one of the defining traits of Dillandau is brutality, and this is evident from as early as episode 2, as the burning of Finalia was Dillandau's initiative, not one of Folken or Dornkirk. As the series progresses, Dillandau takes part in various attacks and schemes against Vaughn and the main cast, both under and against Folken's direct orders. While Dillandau doesn't necessarily seem to know or care about the greater point of these missions, Dillandau still carries them out with vigor, knowing that it is another chance to fight and perhaps even kill Vaughn. One of the earliest of these actually sees Vaughn captured, though, although he soon escapes, and the escape process sees Vaughn scar Dillandau both literally and figuratively to life. This sets off a chain of events which slowly start to break down Dillandau's fragile sanity, as more failed attacks on Vaughn see Dillandau slide into greater frustration, greater madness, greater brutality, and greater instability. Dillandau is finally mentally broken when, during another attack on Vaughn, the Dragon Slayers are wiped out, and Dillandau basically has a panic attack in the midst of battle at the sight of a charging Escaflowne about to strike the killing blow. While Dillandau does escape the close call, the loss of the Dragon Seers sees Dillandau slip into loneliness, as upon the realization that everyone has left, everyone is dead. Now alone, Dillandau slips into this loneliness and soon into a crippling mental stupor. In order to fix this, Dillandau is taken away by court sorcerers for further, quote-unquote, fate modification, and is not seen for a while, although Alan's sister Selena, who's been gone for the entirety of it up until this point, does start to make a few random appearances. It is during one of these that she suddenly snaps, and it is revealed that Dillandau is actually an artificial and or altered persona forced upon Selena as part of a fate altercation experiment carried out by Emperor Dornkirk. It turns out that when Selena was very young, she was kidnapped by Zybok forces and warped into the Lord Dillandau. Only the friendly Jajuka sees Selena/Dillandau somehow make it through all of this brutal experimentation, and now, as a knight, Jajuka rejoins Dillandau for a few last missions, both out of a sense of loyalty and out of a desire to protect the fragile psyche of both Selena and Dillandau. With the brutal Dillandau persona once again in full control, Dillandau takes place in a few more battles against Alan and Vaughn, although isn't quite victorious in any way. In fact, in the last of these, Vaughn finally gives in to rage and almost kills a defenseless Dillandau, though only kills a Jajuka who dies protecting Dillandau and ordering, quote, to bring back that sweet Selena. Jajuka's words finally seem to bring back Selena for good, although Vaughn doesn't notice and still tries to kill her. Alan steps in to protect his sister, though, and this leads to the final fight between the two. A fight which luckily ends in no deaths. Finally, with the end of the series, it is shown that Selena has more or less become herself again and seems to be living happily with her brother. Getting into the examination of Dillandau's character, it is one which in all honesty is not too deep, but does quite a bit with what's given to create an interesting character, a character that is much more interesting than what the archetype should have been. The writers did a very good job in creating a character with layers, and then slowly peeling them back in a way that kept Dillandau relevant not only for the sake of the plot, but also for the curiosity of the viewer. Dillandau never feels boring, and it always feels like there's something else to discover until the final revelation is made. Initially, Dillandau is set up as simply the muscle, the person Folken turns to get the dirty work taken care of and to enforce Zybok's demands. In line with this, Dillandau is initially shown to be quite brutal and arrogant, which are common traits for an enforcer of this nature. Dillandau has little patience for any kind of questioning, and seems to be a narcissist, displaying a dismissive attitude towards almost everyone, even the Dragon Slayers, which, while valued in some sense, are not in any way totally respected. This very early picture of Dillandau is that of a character that, while a little cut and paste, nonetheless fills the role of a brutal enforcer very well, and does seem quite human, albeit a very bad human. As time progresses though, and a few setbacks are incurred upon Dillandau, we soon start to see that underneath the surface level of brutality and arrogance, there is an inherent sense of frustration, of inner insecurity and instability, and these haunting forces soon grow over time and hamper many efforts of Dillandau to remain solely professional, unlike say Folken. On the topic of the two's interactions, I find that they do make good foils to each other, as they have completely opposite views and approaches, yet maintain a sort of, if not respectful, then functioning relationship with each other. Folken is obviously the boss here, but he never belittles Dillandau's mental health. In fact, he does seem to pity him a little, even if he does belittle the enforcer's brutal methods. Dillandau, on the other hand, does seem impatient with Folken and does belittle him a bit from time to time, but, with a few exceptions, generally respects his authority and seems to understand that Folken knows what he's doing and is in charge. The two work well together in both the story and a storytelling sense, because their differences flesh each other out. They never compete with each other for the attention of the viewer because they're such radically different characters. This establishes an interesting working relationship which is neither too friendly or toxic. It is a relationship which, in spite of Dillandau's tendency to get carried away, seems relatively respectful, or at least professional. I would also like to note that it is possible that Folken knew or knew of Selena/Dillandau for a while before we see them on screen, as a possible Folken shows up for a few frames in episode 25 or 26, trying to prevent Selena from being taken by sorcerers for fate experiments in a flashback. If it really is Folken, it would explain a lot of his probable pity on Dillandau and why he seems to be pretty patient with him, as it seems that he does know that Dillandau was an unfortunate product of a cruel experiment, and he did even try to protect Selena, it seems. This might also explain why Dillandau seems to harbor not quite respect, but more respect for Folken than anyone else, it seems. Going back to the primal frustration and rage expressed by Dillandau, it soon becomes obvious that while Dillandau directs rage and insecurity towards Vaughn and Alan, it did not solely originate from the wound Vaughn inflicted. There seems to be something gnawing away at Dillandau, but all we can initially figure is that Dillandau despises losing and being alone. The losing part does make sense for a brutal warlord. It's a common trope that someone who believes might is right hates losing because it proves that they're not right. The fear of loneliness, however, is something that is not inherent to this archetype, and it's the first humanizing trait assigned to Dillandau, that while not initially giving rise to a lot of viewer sympathy or concern, does give rise to some curiosity. We can see that Dillandau does have some kind of warped or broken humanity, that there is something underneath the monster. This curiosity only grows as Dillandau grows more and more unstable, and the fate alteration experiments are brought up. And it is these experiments, and Dillandau's true identity, which cap off a fascinating writing approach to the character. While one is entitled to think whatever they want about the twist reveal that Dillandau is an altered Selena, I think most people can agree that the twist is such a random one, it cannot be really foreseen. It cannot really be predicted. When I first saw the series, in fact, I did kind of note that Dillandau and Selena looked vaguely familiar, but I confidently told myself there's no way that's the same person. They were probably just running out of design elements or creativity, and thus they look kind of similar. I said there's no way that's the same person. That would be crazy. And yet that's exactly what happened. While some may hate this twist because it does kind of come out of nowhere and seems really out there, I personally like it for that exact reason. Again, you're entitled to your own opinion, but the fact that the writers said, yeah, Selena, Dillandau, they're the same person the whole time, the fact that they did that was one that I found inherently fascinating. Whether or not this makes Dillandau sympathetic or even tragic is left to viewer interpretation again. However, it does, in my experiences, at least do a good job of taking away a lot of hate for the character. Which is very impressive considering that Dillandau is initially written as the sort of character that people love to hate. A brutal enforcer with no human empathy and seemingly no redeeming qualities. And yet, somehow, by the end of the series, I felt no hatred in this regard. Now, I'm not going to get into whether or not Selena is responsible for Dillandau's crimes. There are arguments for and against this. But I will say that Dillandau's true identity didn't bother me. And I do really like the insanity of the writing staff just going for the twist. It's a bold step, which I feel I should hate, as it doesn't really make logical sense, and it kinda does come out of nowhere it seems. However, I can't do anything but appreciate this step, as it is something which really showed that the writers wanted to do more with this character other than creating a simple bloodthirsty enforcer with no real depth. Again, if they stuck with the Dillandau of the earlier episodes, it would have been a competent exercise in the archetype of a bloodthirsty warlord. There would have been nothing wrong with that. However, they wanted to surpass that and kind of put their own mark on that, and thus Dillandau's surprise backstory is sprung upon us. And while Dillandau isn't the most developed character, there is still quite a bit of depth there. As someone who obviously has PTSD and probably some other mental health issues, Dillandau is in a sort of way a victim too. Again, I am in no way absolving Dillandau of any crimes. Dillandau is a horrible person. However, a horrible person with layers and a unique backstory, and probably some health issues. Someone who has obviously been through a lot and didn't seek to be where they currently are. Someone who has been struggling with mental health for quite a while. Someone who obviously needs help, or at least someone to talk to but cannot go about it in a healthy manner. Someone who is incredibly flawed and takes this out on other people. Someone who hurts others because pain seems to be almost all they know. In fact, all of this trauma suffered by Selena, and probably Dillandau in the creation of the Dillandau persona, might explain a lot of the brutality. It might be one of them, or both of them, simply lashing out against the world that essentially ruined their life for no reason. It could be them lashing out at their fate as an artificial creation of Dornkirk's insane mission to control fate itself. And in a way, it establishes them as a sort of tragic creation as well. Again, if we separate the two characters, while Dillandau's a horrible person, Selena seems to be a very good person whose life was ruined by an unfair and brutal world. On the topic of Dillandau's role concerning the fate of destiny, Dillandau's creation is one of the biggest pieces of evidence pointing towards the idea that fate manipulation is not a good thing, and that the Emperor is not a good person. Dillandau is a sort of manifestation of the dangers of pinning everything on the idea of fate. As someone whose entire life was cruelly manipulated by a madman in the name of trying to control destiny, Dillandau is a good showing of the destructive efforts that this can have on others. An example of why trying to control someone else's fate is probably not good for that other person. Where Dornkirk shows the folly of trying to control others, Dillandau shows the cost that it can have on that person. However, I would also like to note that that's not where the story ends. The story, in fact, ends with Selena seemingly reverting back to herself, in fact, and possibly even going on to live a happy life with Alan. This shows that while destiny may be cruel and it may seem arbitrary from time to time, people can still manipulate it. And the fact that Selena seems to bounce back proves that maybe we all can.